Far out. Okay. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Maybe you've heard of it. Have you heard of it? Raise your hand. Yeah. Have you actually read it? Anybody? Oh, okay. I'm got to be on my toes. So forgive me if I'm not doing it justice. And we'll have a chance to talk about that during the conversation part. So I've been curious about it since about 1980. It's been a little scary or a little too daunting to actually read. Is it going to be morbid? Will it make me feel sad? I'm not dead yet. Why am I reading this? Well, I kind of found it to be rather inspiring in a way, just studying it a bit over the past month. It's made me less terrified of death, less worried about it, less worried about my bucket list and, oh my God, what's going to become of my pets or, those things that we worry about. Will it be painful? And we don't talk very much about death in the West until it's happened. And we don't know what happens after we die. Many of us think that when the heartbeat stops and the brain activity ceases, that signals the end of our individual human existence. Materialists reject the idea of a soul that transcends this life. And there are others believe we go to heaven or hell, some sort of place for eternity, or that we meet our loved ones. I remember when my mother was dying right here in this room, she was like, I just want to be with my husband, who had died in 1971. So I don't know. I hope she got to be with him. I'm not sure. We don't really know for sure what happens. Maybe some of us have had near-death experiences called NDEs, and those people generally report seeing a bright light. We've seen movies where the ghosts are wandering the earth, are urged to go into the light, or other movies where don't go into the light. Anyway, there's some kind of expectation of some light there. Now, the Tibetan Book of the Dead is traditionally meant to be read out loud to a dead or dying person, usually by a lama, a special teacher who's trained in this. And it's important not only to practice so that you'll be able to remember it at the time of death, but also there's a sense to which the teachings in the Tibetan Book of the Dead refer to this life, which is a kind of space in between as much as the actual space between death and rebirth. Okay, well, what is it? What is this book? Where does it come from? First, it's not really a book. It's more like several chapters from a much larger work. And you could say it's not really about the dead as much as it's about a transitional state or an intermediate state between death and rebirth. You could also say it's about transitional altered states that you experience in your dream time during this life. Now, the title in Tibetan is Bardo Thodol. Pardon my strong American accent. A bardo is a Tibetan word. It refers to a state of transformation and suspended reality. And this bardo, between death and rebirth, has multiple sub-bardos as well. Basically, the term bardo can be applied to any situation where there's a pause. A pause. It's technically a state that occurs entirely in the mind. It's not an actual physical space. I could say I've just been through the bardo this week planning this presentation. And here I am. Oh, it's very exciting. It's a kind of a bardo. I know there's a bardo if you're going to fall asleep and how many times you're going to have to wake up in the middle of the night. So a bardo is a term that we can apply to these sorts of pauses and spaces between the intermediate space. what if we translate the Bardo Thodo Ball title into English? It doesn't come out to be the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It's the Great Liberation by Hearing in the Intermediate State, or the Great Liberation by Understanding in the Bardo. Anyhow, it's a mouthful in English, and you can understand why calling it the Tibetan Book of the Dead sounds way more interesting. For the Tibetans, they don't believe that there are any dead people, that we're all in a bardo in transition from one life into the next. Joe, let's show the picture of Walter and Kazi, please. Okay, who are these dudes? On the left, Kazi Dawa Sandup, a translator from Sikkim, India, in the north of India. It's very close to Tibet. And this on the right is Walter Evans Wentz. Now, he's responsible for bringing us to the West, the first Western translation into English. And you call Walter an eccentric spiritualist from Trenton, New Jersey. He was a member of the Theosophical Society, which I've mentioned before, that time I talked about chakras. The Theosophical Society, founded in the late 19th century to foster a sort of brotherhood of man and kind of integral ideas about esoteric matters, including, Satanism and all sorts of things. Well, Walter, he had met Lawrence of Arabia, who said, oh, you should really go to India and really go to Tibet. So he traveled, and he funded his travels from his rental properties in Florida, apparently, and traveled to India and Tibet. And he happened to purchase some old documents from a British soldier during one of his trips. At that point, this is the early 1920s, British soldiers were occupying much of Tibet at that time. And so, of course, they'd come across documents and try to sell them. So this is how Walter came to possess these teachings. And curious to know what they said, he commissioned this Tibetan translator, Lama Kazi Dawa Sandup, who is an English teacher, but trained in the monasteries and had some training in Tibetan Buddhism. Now, Evans Wentz chose the title, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, because it sounded like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which had already been discovered, and he thought they were basically saying the same thing. I don't know anything about the Egyptian Book of the Dead. That's perhaps for another topic. So the name is easier to remember than the more accurate translation of the actual title, Liberation Through Hearing in the Intermediate State. Anyhow, the translated documents were published in English in 1927 by Oxford University Press. Walter went to Oxford as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, with a preface by Carl Jung, who wrote, "Its philosophy contains the quintessence of Buddhist psychological criticism." If that means anything to you. Okay, we can take the picture down now. And let's put up the picture of Padmasambhava, please. Okay, here's another painting, a Tibetan Thangka painting. Now, where did these teachings come from? It's traditionally believed that they are the work of the legendary Padmasambhava in the 8th century AD. Padmasambhava is also called Guru Rinpoche, which means precious guru. He's also called the Lotus Born, or the Lotus Rinpoche, the Lotus Guru. He is thought to have magically been born from the lotus. You can see in this picture towards the bottom, he's just appearing out of the lotus, no mud, no lotus. There he is. When you see him, he has a little mustache and a little soul patch on his face. He's in his right hand holding the double dorje, and in his left hand a skull cup. And he's got there in the crook of his left elbow the Khatfanga staff. And there are other deities around him that I won't try to explain to you. See, he was an 8th century Indian Buddhist teacher, and he's largely responsible for sort of translating Buddhism into the Vajrayana, into creating Tibetan Buddhism. He's the main dude when it comes to Tantra, these esoteric techniques for embodying the guru. These are mystical, so-called magical texts. And he is the master of the Tantra. And he was sent for by the kings to try and change Tibet into a theocracy, a Buddhist ruled place, if you will. He all of the gods and all the beautiful deities in Tibetan Buddhism can be related to the previous religions in Tibet. It's called the Bon religion, B-O-N. I think there's an umlaut or something over the O. And there were a lot of gods that people worshipped, and they were Padmasambhava helped translate them into concepts in Buddhism so that the people would accept the Buddhism, if that makes sense to you. Well, at some point, Padmasambhava thought that his teachings, specifically these teachings about the Bardo, thought they might be misused. And so he hid them. And they stayed hidden until the 14th century, when a man named Karmalingpa discovered these texts in a hidden away in a mountainside cache of documents. Apparently there were, and maybe still are, hidden teachings, apparently. And sometimes they're hidden in physically in mountainsides by the master himself, or sometimes they're hidden in the mind of the disciple. That Padmasambhava might choose a disciple. You are going to be responsible for transmitting these teachings until the proper time when they are meant to be revealed. So those who discover these teachings in mountains or in their own minds are called tertans, and the teachings they find are called terma. So this text of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is a terma teaching, hidden and now revealed. So let's take down the picture of Padmasambhava, please, and we'll put up the wheel picture. Okay, this is the Wheel of Samsara. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Tibetan ideas about death. It's a very complicated painting. Now, the Tibetans consider it a matter of common sense that all animate beings exist along a continuum of lives, and that our true self, our absolute self, is not our physical body, but rather a sort of spirit or soul that can be reborn. And not always as a human being, but perhaps as a being from another realm, of which there are 6 main realms. And on the, apparently all this information is codified in these drawings inside the painting, such that a person who is even illiterate but has only memorized the teachings orally can see them and be reminded of them. Well, so there are 6 realms, and you'll see those in the central let me look at the drawing here. The very center of the drawing, there are 3 creatures. These are meant to symbolize the 3 poisons. And then there's another circle outside of it that represents the wheel of karma. And then further out are these 6 realms 6 realms of existence that could where you could possibly be reborn into one of these realms, depending on your skills and your practice beforehand. So from the least desirable realms you could be born in, we have the hell realm, where beings suffer the most. They are incarnations of hate. Then we have the hungry ghost realm, which aren't really ghosts. These are beings that are caught in a state of extreme frustration. Often there are pictures of them as beings that might have a huge stomach and then a really tiny mouth, so they can't ever quite eat. It's very frustrating. And we have the animal realm, where beings suffer from a relative lack of intelligence and a limited ability to communicate. Then there's the human realm, where we are now, which we're more familiar with. Lots of sorrow and joy. And beyond the human realm is the so-called realm of the demigods. What are demigods? Maybe, super powerful humans. Is Kim Kardashian a demigod? I don't know. Those people suffer too in their own way. And then finally, the highest in terms of merit and intelligence are those of the gods. Now, none of these states of existence are permanent. It's not like you're going to hell for all eternity. And apparently, each one of these states comes to an end, and another will begin after a bardo. Now, the death and the between and the rebirth processes are all influenced by the law of karma. And also, if you recall, as well as your training. Obviously, if you've never studied these creatures or these deities, you won't recognize them when you're in the bardo. Now, karma refers to actions. Robert Thurman, as one of my favorite experts, calls it evolutionary action. But the name karma makes it seem more mysterious. It means cause and effect, not like a punishment. You did a bad thing, you're being punished because you're going to the hell realm, or a reward, but like the natural consequences or effects of actions that occur, whether we intend them or not. It suggests a kind of lack of free will in the matter. Here's a tiny example. You accidentally touch a hot stove and you unintentionally burn your hand. There may be other effects that come out after that. A mistake in a past life, or even in the life of an ancestor. Any number of things can happen. Your ancestor escaped from Europe and came to the United States. Somehow you are involved in this web of karma. So on it goes. So this wheel of samsara, it illustrates, as I said, all of the concepts in its many tiny details. What I think made the largest figure is this rather vicious-looking god of death, who's holding this big disc, this big wheel, and laughing and snarling, and he's rather bloodthirsty. And he has other names besides Yama, but he's holding the wheel of samsara. And if you're interested in learning about these, and there's I'll give you a link in the notes. There's a guy who has 25 short YouTube videos where every little section of this is explained and what the symbolism means. So you'll have that in the note. We can take down the wheel, please, at this point. So we are caught in an endless cycle of rebirths until such time as we can somehow gain liberation from this endless samsara. You can think of samsara as some sorrows. It's difficult to experience liberation, or we can call that enlightenment, during our lifetime, but not impossible. Liberation refers to enlightenment. So here's a definition of enlightenment. What is it? Enlightenment in Buddhism, known as Bodhi or awakening, is the ultimate spiritual goal, a profound understanding of reality that frees one from suffering and the cycle of rebirth by extinguishing ignorance and craving. leading to perfect wisdom, compassion, and liberation. It's a radical shift from delusion to clarity, embodying a state of permanent peace, openness, and connection, where one sees the true interdependent nature of all things as exemplified by Siddhartha Gautama, the first Buddha. So that's apparently that's the goal, and it's rather indescribable, but people certainly try to describe it as. But it's apparently easier to gain this kind of insight or to be liberated during times of intense transformation, such as during the intermediate state between the cessation of life and a new birth. So that's why the practice is. Thus, it's worthwhile to practice during one's lifetime for an eventual reincarnation or the possibility of liberation, or so say the Tibetan Buddhists. If it turns out that nothingness awaits us, Robert Thurman says, how can something be nothing? He argues there is no such thing as nothing. It is not a thing. It is not it. Anyway, if it turns out that there's nothingness after this incarnation, then now what harm can it do to pretend otherwise, preparing for something that doesn't happen? But what if there is the possibility of reincarnation or of liberation? And we've all heard of near-death experiences in the West. And also there have been many Tibetan lamas who have apparently returned to describe their experience in the bardo between death and rebirth. And through intensive practice and memorization of the many prayers and images in this teaching, these beings manage to return to life, to direct where they're going to return to life. I mean, return in a nearby province, so that those searching for the reincarnated Dalai Lama or different Padmasambhava, etc., can be found. So they believe that we are, our true selves continue on in an endless cycle of rebirths. And if you're not trained to recognize the signs during the bardo, the dying individual will be terrified and overwhelmed and perhaps end up being born in a less desirable realm. Well, so now we're going to go directly to what they say happens in the bardo. So according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which consists of lots of prayers, you call upon all the gurus, call upon them, protect this dear being. And you imagine these things being read by your neighborhood lama. There's even a film on YouTube. I'll give you the link where you can watch this lama and see the body of a dead fellow who has been summoned, who's there on his bed. And here's this lama with his carefully wrapped teachings that he unwraps and he reads them in Tibetan and they are translated. So that's, if you were interested to know exactly what it looks like or feels like to be there, that's a good thing. But I think I could tell you roughly what it's like in the bardo. According, these are your opportunities to escape the wheel of samsara. It looks a little bit like a board game in a way. You know how we have those circles of dependent arising, things arise, display for a while, and then fall away. You can imagine the bardo as a kind of a circle. And your human life has ended. And at this moment of death, we'll call this person the bardo being, child of Buddha nature. You could give this individual the name, your own name. So at the moment of death, the bardo being leaves the body and enters the bardo. And if she is well trained, she can recognize the different signs and not be bewildered by the crazy images and beings that appear in the mind at this time. So all of this is occurring in her mind. So first off, here's her first chance to win the $100,000 pyramid. It's the Dharmata. It's an amazing, indescribable, bright light. And this is her first opportunity to get off the wheel and to be liberated. She has to be relaxed and open and see the vision as coming from her mind and to embrace it and not to be afraid. I think the main point of all of this is do not be afraid. These visions cannot harm you. But usually a person fails to recognize it and then is forced to wander on, where she will experience another bright light, which I believe is the blue light, which is also an opportunity for liberation. Now, usually we've failed to see that too, and we move along in the bardo. Joe, let's show the peaceful deities. Okay, here are a bunch of different deities that I think this is seeing them in the bardo is of course predicated on whether or not you've studied these particular images. So there are many different deities that are called the peaceful deities. There are 42 peaceful deities and also 38 wrathful deities, a big group called the 100 deities, which you don't need to memorize. And some of them are, they're very attractive and beautiful, these peaceful deities. Some of them are entwined together as like the central figure is sort of mother-father figures in union. Now, some of the Buddhas might be familiar, but exactly which deities appear vary depending on the teacher and the artist and the tradition. So I won't attempt to name them all, but you can see them. They're here in the painting. Now let's take down the peaceful deities and show the wrathful deities. So when you're encountering the peaceful deities, you might feel like they're very pleasurable and you enjoy them, but you're not realizing that they exist only in your own mind. And they are not real. You have to realize that they're not real and are in your mind, and see the very bright lights coming from the deities, coming from their heart space. The idea is that you're supposed to merge with them and accept them, embrace them. So, of course, you are not going to recognize them. You have another opportunity. Things get a little rough. These are the wrathful deities. Sometimes they are also in these sort of wrathful mother-father groupings, and they can be very scary, and if you see them are terrified, you want to run away. I'm gonna leave this bardo as any opening possible. And there are womb openings, many womb openings, or egg openings, if you will. If you go into them, bang, you're reborn in a realm. So the wrathful deities are part of you. They're your friends. They're in your mental space. If you recognize them as that, you will be liberated. So we can take the wrathful deities down now. So most of us don't recognize this. We continue to wander in the bardo and are reborn again. Bang, we're back here. And there are various opportunities to leave the bardo through a womb door. And there's a notion that with proper training during your life, you can be better equipped to navigate this bardo and these peaceful and wrathful deities and so on. Now, you could say that, if you've never been trained in with these deities, that if you have a Christian tradition or Muslim tradition, you may have other deities and other beings that will appear in your mind. Anyway, perhaps the bardo being has vowed to return again and again until all beings are enlightened. That sort of person is a bodhisattva. Maybe the person in the bardo is the Dalai Lama, who's made a vow to return in the neighborhood, so he can be found and discovered. Anyway, the main point of all this instruction is to remain calm and carry on. Don't be terrified by anything you see or hear. And trust in the process, and cultivate an attitude of compassion and love. And there are many prayers that will be read by the attending Lama to the dead person, invoking the gurus, asking for help and protection, and as they move through the bardo. So I've gone on a bit long. It's 11:34. I think that's enough chatter. I think you have some sort of idea. Funeral rites. Sorry you're having to hear about this from me if this is the first time. If you look at the notes, you'll have much better, more scholarly people. I am no one in particular, just an ordinary being, just curious about this and scared of death, like so many people. Also, me say Robert Thurman, in one of his talks on YouTube, says a woman came up to him and said, "Oh, this death process sounds fantastic. I can't wait to try it." Just note that we are not advocating speeding the process along. You don't need to speed it along. It'll happen. Just maybe a little bit of study here and there can make it less terrifying for you and or your loved ones. That's the idea. So finally, so now we're going to transition into the meditation phase of our meeting. Now I've got 2 recordings by Laurie Anderson. Hope you know who that is. She's very famous, very talented, and she's a woman. And